What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? Story 1. There have been several confirmed cases in a few different countries of people living in other people's houses unbeknownst to them. I believe one case went on for a couple of years. The intruder would wait until the homeowner would go to work and then sneak out and steal small amounts of food as not to be noticed. Well, eventually the homeowner did notice and couldn't figure out where his food was going, so he set up a hidden camera to record it. I can only imagine how scary it would have been to come home from work one night and sit down to watch the video, skipping through hours of stillness, to suddenly come across a person crawling out of your attic. And then the slow realization that that person is still in your house at that moment. And then the retroactive fear of thinking back to all the times you laid awake at night and heard a noise, which you just dismissed as coming from the pipes or the old wooden beams, but actually it was a fucking person just above you. It gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I think about it. Story 2. I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends, hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friends told him they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bedrolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kit and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened, and afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. Story 3. One day as a kid I was exploring the forests near our house with my cousin. The forest was on a hill, but there were several craters there because of bombs that were dropped there during the World Wars, Germany. One day we saw a backpack at the bottom of one. We tried to climb down, but it was kind of steep and slippery, so we didn't want to risk falling. We planned on returning later with a rope, and went home. The next day news story was that there was a backpack found with the remains of a girl, in that forest. A guy walking his dog found it, after the dog wouldn't stop barking and going crazy at the edge of the crater, while staring at the backpack. We stopped exploring the forests after. Story 4. Lived with 3 other girls sophomore year of college. All 3 took off early for spring break, leaving me alone in the house. First night alone, I heard someone bang on my front door at 2 a.m. Then I hear more knocks at the back door. A man yells, "Boulder police, open the door!" When I didn't, I heard body slams against both doors. Soon I hear, "Little girl, open the door, we know you're alone." At this point I'm so scared I keep accidentally dialing 611 instead of 911. When I eventually do get the police, cars roll up, thankfully, just minutes later. Officers have 4 boys from our school hockey team face down on the grass. I had to file restraining orders against them, and the kicker one lived across the street from me, and we never spoken a single word before then. Story 5. When I worked in healthcare I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst. Amazingly, he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out, and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. Take your full dose of antibiotics, people. Story 6. When I was about 8 years old our school was doing swimming lessons as part of the curriculum. My mum worked late, so we went to after-school care and didn't get home until after dark. When we got home Mum asked me to take my wet togs, bathing suit, and towel out to the clothesline to dry so I could use them the next day. I was so confident going outside to do this, and had this real feeling of being a big kid. I walked into our backyard only for a man to be running at me. I screamed, jumped inside, and instinctively locked the back door as I did so. As this was happening, my mom told me she heard the guy jump the gate which was next to her bedroom just after she heard me scream and came running to find me. I slept with the light on until I was 16, and I get my husband to go outside for me while it's dark. Story 7. I was a director of my college's student government. There was this dude who was always willing to take on projects, so I gave him lots of stuff. I remember thinking B was very charismatic and well-dressed, and when he told me he owned a startup clothing company, I bought some stuff from his website. It was typical for student government kids to end up at the same parties, and I ran into him several times outside of committee. I was studying abroad my senior year, and I was here on Reddit. Saw an article with the guy's face on it. Turns out he raped 12 girls at my university. It was apparently well known, but because his father was a dean wealthy professor, it kept getting swept under the rug. Apparently he was using extracurriculars like the student government to keep coming back to campus after he had been removed from his classes. Story 8. I'm a crime writer and once interviewed a woman who told me an unrelated horror story about something that happened to her as a girl. When she was like 10, she had trouble sleeping and imagined the boogeyman was living in her closet, staring at her during the night. Every night she would come down and tell her parents, and every night her father would tell her the boogeyman didn't exist and she should go back to bed. Well, this happened for several nights and the father got tired of it. So that night he walked her back to her bedroom, turned on the light, and said, "I'll show you there's no boogeyman," and went to open the closet door. But something on the other side held it shut. He sent his daughter out of the room and forced the door open to find that a man was inside. He'd been sneaking into their house every night to stand in the girl's closet and watch her, and maybe more. He beat the ever-loving shit out of the man, and the man went to prison. When I interviewed this woman, I looked him up online. He'd recently gotten out on parole and had skipped out on his weekly checks. There was a warrant out for his arrest, and nobody knew where he was anymore. Story 9. When I was a little girl around 9 years old, I was playing at the school down the street from my house. It was the middle of summer and myself and a girlfriend were hanging around watching the boys play street hockey. One of the boys called my name and said a man in the parking lot was looking for me. The parking lot was mostly obscured by the building, but I could see an old 70s-style van that hadn't been there earlier. I was walking over to the van when the mother of one of the other kids showed up looking for her son and asked me what I was doing. When I told her someone in the van was looking for me, she took my hand and started to walk with me, and the van pulled out and sped away. Friend's mom walked me home, and I wasn't allowed out of my yard without my parents for the rest of the summer. I was so upset and didn't understand why I was being punished. It was only years later that I understood that I was likely being targeted by some opportunistic scumbag for who knows what. Story 10. I've told this story before. I'm an eye doctor and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid. 2 other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it, and it wasn't getting any better. At this point, it was swollen and painful for weeks with no improvement despite being on tons of meds. Apparently either of them thought to flip the lid upside down, you know that gross trick some kids do with their upper eyelids? It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge and saw it move. This wasn't an abscess, it was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye a few days before she got this infection. I removed the larva and within 2 days the wound closed and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes, I do have the photos from this case for those interested.